This week on Who Deserves to be Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, we make the case for you to vote for Mana and Chubby Checker to be inducted. The nominees for this year's class for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame have been announced. The list for this year is as follows: Bad Company, The Black Crowes, Mariah Carey, Chubby Checker, Joe Cocker, Billy Idol with Steve Stevens, Joy Division / New Order, Cyndi Lauper, Mana, Oasis, Outkast, Fish, Soundgarden, and the White Stripes. As they have for the past decade or so, the Hall has a fan vote, which does count towards who gets inducted. Go to vote.rockhall.com to vote. You can vote for up to 7 artists once a day until April 21st. The link to the voting is in the show notes there. That would be the vote.rockhall.com link. This year, we will do what we always do. We'll take a look at the cases for at least 2 nominees per week. And this week, we are going to finish off our nominations by making the case for you to vote for 2 of the most surprising nominees that there have been in quite some time on this: the Guadalajara, Mexico band Mana and Philly's own Chubby Checker. First up, Mana, whose original name was Sombrero Verde. And as we always do when we go to the stat machine, to the tail of the tape we go. Mana released 9 studio albums, 3 live albums, 1 soundtrack album, 3 box sets, and 7 compilation albums. Of those, 15 went top 40 on the American Latin charts, with 13 of those 15 hitting the top 10, including 8 that went to number 1. Their 2006 album, Amar es Combatir, sold over 16 million copies in America alone. Their 1992 album, Donde Jugaran los Niños, sold over 12 million copies. Their 2012 album, Drama y Luz, sold over 5 million copies. Their 2008 live album, Arde el Cielo, sold over 2 million copies each. And they have 2 other platinum and 3 other gold albums. Mana also released 31 singles. Of those, 22 hit the top 40 on the American Latin charts, with 18 hitting the top 10, including 10 that went to the number 1 spot. They've had 12 songs go platinum, including 10 of those 12 going multi-platinum, including 4 that sold over 10 million copies in America alone. They are the biggest selling Latin band of all time, selling over 40 million records and counting. Now, I get a lot of people, especially in the comments, telling me that the Hall should only be for rock music and that's it. No hip-hop, no dance, no country, not even R&B and soul. I get where you're coming from, but now it's time for you to put your money where your mouth is. Mana is a straight-up rock band who've been around since 1981. They've had 10 members, with lead singer Fer Olvera and bassist Juan Calleros being there from the very beginning. They have influenced virtually every Latin group over the past 40 years, and they have been eligible for the Hall since 2006. So here's the question to all of you who only want your pure rock artists in the Hall. The Hall has just nominated the biggest Latin group of all time, and that group plays hard rock. Are you now going to amend your argument and say that only rock groups from Europe and the United States should be inducted? Or are you going to give your vote to a rock group that sold over 40 million albums worldwide and has been really successful in America, but happens to sing in Spanish? On at least a couple of my daily fan votes, I voted for them to be inducted. Can't argue with the stats. Now, to an artist who has been eligible for the Hall since the Hall inducted its very first class back in 1986. We're talking about Ernest Evans, a.k.a. Chubby Checker. Time to look at his stats along with an ironic twist. No pun intended. Back to the tail of the tape we go. Chubby Checker released 16 studio albums and 3 compilation albums. Of those, 7 hit the top 40 in America with his first 2 albums, 1960's Twist with Chubby Checker, and For Twisters Only, hitting the top 10, while those 2 aforementioned albums were the only 2 to hit the top 40 in the United Kingdom, with Twist with Chubby Checker getting the highest at number 13. Chubby also released 51 singles. Of those, 23 hit the top 40 in America, with 9 of those 23 going top 10, including 3 that hit number 1. There is a huge, important asterisk to that stat that we will circle back to in a minute because it's important as to why Chubby is finally being considered for the Hall. In the UK, by the way, 10 of his songs hit the top 40, with 3 of those 10 going top 10. Again, there's a huge asterisk to that as well. For people under the age of, let's say, 50, here is why Chubby Checker is important to rock and roll and why the Hall finally found time to consider him. Back when Chubby first made his name back in 1960, rock and roll, as people now remember it, had lost its rebellious streak and was in the period between early rock and roll and the British invasion of 1964 with the Beatles. Elvis Presley had left the army and was doing bubblegum movies. Buddy Holly was killed in a plane crash by then. And other popular rock and rollers like Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, and a host of others had gone on to tour overseas, especially in the United Kingdom, which is when kids like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones took a liking to it, but they were still 4 years away from making it big in America. In the meantime, rock and roll was essentially bubblegum pop in America, with teen idols ruling the pop charts. This is where Chubby Checker comes in. Chubby was not only a singer, but he was also a dancer. You could actually say that Chubby was possibly the first influencer of the 1960s, although there was no such thing as social media back then. At that point in time, the tastemaker for the teeny boppers, the social media, if you will, as teenagers were called back then, they were called teeny boppers. There was a show on television that was hosted by a guy by the name of Dick Clark. It was called American Bandstand, and through his dance hits, especially on that show, Chubby made music history by appearing on that show. Through his music, Chubby covered 2 songs and made them both his own, with dances to go along with them. A cover of the Good Timers song Pony Time with the dance The Pony, and the song that Billboard magazine has said is the biggest song to ever hit the Billboard singles chart, which is a cover of Hank Ballard and the Midnighters song The Twist, with its extremely popular dance The Twist. In fact, he did a sequel of sorts to that song called Let's Twist Again, which was also a huge hit. Chubby also made a hit out of the Champs' instrumental song Limbo Rock by adding lyrics to it. Let's talk about the impact of the song The Twist. It was the first song to hit number 1 twice with the exact same version of the song, in its original release back in 1960 and again in 1962 with its re-release. In the United Kingdom, the song was re-released in 1975 and went to number 5, and a remix version of that song was remixed and released in 1988 and went to number 2 in the United Kingdom. Chubby has also performed the song a bunch of times while playing himself on TV shows like Ally McBeal and Murphy Brown. Chubby's made an awful lot out of one hit, trust me. Here is where the irony comes in. See, back in 2002, Chubby Checker held a protest outside of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum in Cleveland, Ohio, because he felt that, A, radio stations weren't playing his song The Twist enough, and B, that he had been routinely snubbed by the Hall since he had been eligible since 1986. At the time, a member of the nominating committee, Seymour Stein, said that Chubby should and will be considered. 23 years later, he finally is. Can't say the Hall doesn't hold a grudge. Will he get inducted? Well, he's getting a lot of fan vote love, that's for sure. In fact, I believe he is at this moment ranked number 6 or 7 on the fan votes. My thought, though, is that he might not get in as a performer, but that they will probably put him in the musical excellence category, we'll say. Just like they did that year that LL Cool J was up as a performer. He didn't get in as a performer, but he got into the musical excellence category, and that's how he is a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. In any event, Chubby's place in music history is secure, and the Hall should recognize it this year and not wait until he dies like they do with everybody else. I mean, the guy's going to be 84 by the time the Hall does the ceremony in November. And that is it for our look at the nominees for this year's Hall class. We will put the link to all the other nominees for this year in the show notes. And as we said before, the Hall has a fan vote, which does count towards who gets inducted. So go to vote.rockhall.com to vote. You don't have much time, though. You can vote up to 7 different artists once a day, but that ends on April 21st, which isn't that far from now. The link to the voting is in the show notes as well. And next week, we make the push for the class of 2026 by making the case for putting the B-52s into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that is it for who deserves to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We also invite you to check out our other podcast, the Music History Today podcast, where we go over what happened on that date in music history. That podcast drops daily, including weekends, on this channel that you're either watching or listening to this podcast on. We also have the Music History In-Depth podcast, where we go more in-depth into the events that happened for that week in music history. And that podcast posts every Tuesday on this channel that you're either watching or listening to this podcast on. Thank you very, very much for listening or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify.